This is Empowered Human Academy. Welcome home.
It's easy to romanticize growth and learning, and it's tough sometimes. I'm not gonna lie to you, but to me it's exciting. It feels like, oh, this is what life has always been doing, and I'm doing what the template of life is.
This is about love. This is about light. This is about the idea that you have everything you will ever need.
And this life of yours, this is where you grow, you expand, and you remember who you really are.
I'm Abe.
I'm Isaac.
In Empowered Human Academy, we join with humans of all kinds to feel the inspiration that can only come with empowered living.
The stories you hear today are unique, but the energy you hear today belongs to you too. So, with hearts wide open, let's begin.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Empowered Human Academy with our friend and a person who is really inspiring in a lot of ways, Orion Paul. Hi, Orion. You're one of our good friends, and I'm really excited to have a conversation with you today because this is basically what we do every time we get on the phone, even if it's for 5 minutes or an hour. I'm like, let's not shoot the shit. Maybe let's shoot the shit for 5 seconds and then what's on your heart? What do you believe about the universe today? Everything. So I'm really excited for you to be here and for our listeners to listen in on a little bit of your heart, your mind, where you're at, who you are. How are you doing today?
Hey, it's so good to be with you, Abe and Isaac, through the screen, across the radio waves, and with whoever's listening to this right now. I echo everything you just said. I feel like there are some friends that you have just fun with. There are some friends that you went through super transformational seasons of life with. And then there's friends that you can just always connect on ideas and life and philosophy. And there's definitely some contrast between us. I admire a lot of the ways that you guys shine, that it's very different than me, And so I feel like it's even easier to see that in y'all because in some ways I am not this super empowerment focused person. I've learned so much just from proximity of friendship. And so I like I told Isaac, he asked if I listened to these conversations. I listen to these. I get a lot from y'all, and I'm excited to sit down and talk for a little bit, connect with heart and mind, as you said, Abe.
You know the drill because you've heard these before, and so maybe you've practiced an answer. We're about to find out. The opening question is, as ever, what words of identity feel like a home that is yours specifically, not about other people, not about a relationship? Those may be factors that you choose to bring in, but not necessarily. What words of identity feel like your own when you're not looking to make an impression? You're just you being you. What feels like it fits?
That last part, when you're not trying to make an impression, I feel like I do. This is one I've recently been able to say, and it's felt really aligning, is identifying as an artist. And I think what that means is just following another word that I would say people say to me, but I also agree with, is creative. But through the lens of artist, I feel like I've figured out recently part of what being an artist is just always being authentic to what you're doing and creating. And so sometimes people think of an artist as oh, this is what that artist does. But to me, an artist can evolve and change so much and change mediums and change so many directions in life. And I don't know, maybe the way that I feel about that word is I think everyone should feel that way, I guess. But yeah, I would say artist. And then another one that's totally unique, because Rebecca and I were talking about answering this question a week ago. And I was like, I feel like I don't have a bunch of tangible things to point to, but I feel like a healer and a space holder. Is I'm a place for people to land, but I also feel like healer is this unique one that I've never said or described myself as ever to anyone. And that came up when I was thinking through this answer.
Fascinating. Tell me, I'm not even going to be more specific with my question. Tell me more.
I think when I was a teenager, it was really helpful. At the end of my teens, my friend bought me the Strengths Finders test, and
Mm,
if you don't know what Strengths Finders is, it's just a way to kind of identify some of your skill sets focused on what you're already good at and trying to
mm,
find pathways in that realm. And my number one strength is restorative.
mm,
And I feel like I can go macro, like big picture, and micro, like small picture. I feel like I probably spend more time in the macro space because I love ideas and I love talking about society and behavior and concept. And so
Mhm.
I feel like I need to figure out how to help humans
mm,
heal, humanity heal, become better today than we were tomorrow. And that has to
yeah.
do with treatment towards self. And also, I feel like so much of it has to do with relationships with
Mm-hmm.
others too. Like it's not just personal healing, it's like connected interpersonal healing
Mm-hmm.
and communities healing. So
Yeah. Why? What makes you able to say, or if that's even too far along, what makes you even able to think that now? You said you've never introduced yourself this way before. Why?
it's a good question. The true answer is I don't know.
Okay.
The
Yeah.
the me elaborating would be I'm just trying to be honest about
Mm-hmm.
the realities that are in
Yeah.
my
Yeah.
life, and so I feel like I'm seeing that, I'm feeling that. I don't have a lot of like things that I could give you. Like here's an
Yeah.
example of how I do it. Like I'm not
Cool.
a therapist. I am
Yeah.
not
Yeah.
a yeah. I don't have like a role where I could point you to
Yeah.
necessarily, but I do feel like art in itself, I think, is kind of prophetic. It's like
Mm.
future minded. I heard a quote this past weekend at a film festival that was like, artists are the animals that can feel the earthquake before it comes. And
Mm.
so then they're like creating things and they're sensing things that then other people pick up. And then they're like, they see what they were interacting with later because it becomes
Mm-hmm.
more
Mm-hmm.
clear. And I feel like healers are like the opposite of that. They're like in the past, maybe, or like they're focused on where things got stuck. Like if you
Huh.
imagine something going down a stream and it gets stuck on the side and it's just
Yeah. Yeah.
cycling in this eddy on the edge, but it needs to like get back into the current, get back into the flow, get back into like the
Mm-hmm.
essence, the life.
Hmm.
So yeah, I don't, like I said, I don't know why. I don't have an answer yet
Yeah.
for the healer thing, but probably because I've talked a lot with my friends. My background's in video production. It's more technical in that way, but I do probably sense myself, even if it's not vocation wise,
Mm.
getting more into community work, getting more
Mm-hmm.
into community relationship work. And I've done that a lot since we moved to the neighborhood that we're in right now, and
Mm-hmm.
just continuing to build that muscle. And maybe that's like the one place where I see that happening a little bit right now.
Sure.
Hmm.
I find this, like, the larger answer that you're speaking here, beautiful. I think in part because, like, the essence, I don't know, like the essence of who we are per my current worldview anyway, what I believe right now, like that's something um ineffable, I think. And maybe it's an indicator that we've landed on something real that we can't really describe how it got there or why it's true right now.
Mm.
Maybe the things that like have a storyline, no, I'm not even going to define that. Like, I'm not going to say that's less than, because like meaning can come from anywhere. But I think it's struck. I feel like I've touched something important in you sharing that perspective on it, so thank you.
Well, and I'm just curious about, you said it's been a recent development of like identifying as that or even exploring what that means to you. Are you in a space right now that you are thinking like, okay, I know this about myself, or I know my capacity to do this. And does that initiate some sort of desire within you to kind of go down that path to explore that? Or is it more so identifying what is and then just kind of letting it be? Does that make sense? Like one is like more action oriented, maybe goal oriented, or my mind goes to like, okay, are you seeing places where you can insert yourself as the healer or set up the environment for healing, or are you just kind of accepting that this is just a part of who you are?
Yeah, it's almost like the second one where it's like I look down and I'm like, oh, I'm wearing that clothing. It's not like
Wow, cool.
it's not goal oriented. That's a great question. I've always wanted to ask you guys at this point in the podcast. We don't have to spend a lot of time there. I know you're interviewing me, but when do you think someone has an individual identity, and how much of that is from the womb conception, like this is a part of this human, or how much of that is kind of layered on because of your life experiences, birth order, like you could fill in a million things there that would impact that, but
sure.
Yeah. That's a great question. For me, just off the top of my head, I think that there are kind of natural traits that we're kind of born with. One can be more quiet, one can be more extroverted. Like literally, my mom always told me I always kicked in the womb, and I was very active, and I had a lot of energy, literally from conception. But then, as I grow older, and of course, this is just my very, very individual experience, but there are a lot of things that kind of come out as I allow myself space and safety for them to be and to explore without having to be like, oh, well, I'm a flirtatious person, right? But I repressed that so much for my whole life because I thought it was bad, or I didn't know how to explore it. So I think that there are a lot of different variables of our identity that kind of come out in different ways. And over time, when we allow them to, and when we feel like it could be an aha moment, like, oh, I am flirtatious, or it could be like, I want to practice being flirtatious because that's coming from a core desire with where I'm at right now. But I don't know if that concretely answered your question, but I just think it's complex.
It speaks to when it comes out, like it's kind of like you're saying it's always there, but then the way that when we align with certain things and how much it is a part of us, that it's like our lungs, sometimes it expands or maybe it contracts.
Yep. 100%. And I identify as an artist too. So I like what you said about things kind of evolving and changing and exploring. And you're just kind of like a wave, or just kind of like you're not in one space. And I think the human experience is just very fluid. And I think just diving into that fluidity and momentum allows if we're aware of it, can allow us to accept and kind of honor the things that are coming out in that flow, if that makes sense.
I think for me, because this is a space that I'm like this family of idea is something that I'm actively exploring. And so what I feel compelled to share here is not like my thesis, but something like the last thing that I read that sounded right. And the last thing that I read that sounded right is that we are larger than this. We've done this more than once. We are doing it maybe more than once right now. And when we show up in this form here, we do so with a specific chosen perspective, like a definite, distinct perspective. Like this is how we are protruding into this realm today. Like it's an elected thing. And I think the parts that are important there are the fact that it's, well, per this worldview, within this worldview, it's a fact that it's choice and it's also definite. Not that it can't express itself in many different ways, not that its self-understanding can't evolve, but I think that the last thing that I read that sounded right was that we show up here as an expression of us, as a theory of ourselves, as an application of ourselves, as a stance maybe, that is elected and is specific. And does that make sense?
Yeah, no, it really does. And that answers the question perfectly. It makes sense why you'd ask that question, because you're really getting at the root of that then, like the core of someone's presence here at this time, in this place, in their body, and in this this pass through.
How would you answer your own question?
Yeah, I love what Isaac just said in as far as ways of having ideas. the last thing I read that sounded true. I feel so in between worldviews right now that I'm saturating and soaking in a lot, and I'm not like certainty is this beautiful drug that I used to have growing up, and so I don't want to just keep saying I don't know to every answer, but
That's okay.
I am probably a tad bit more on like there is a part of our identity that is just uniquely ours, but it'd be hard for me to sway from like environmental things impact the playing out of that, just because from what I've been reading lately and understanding about ourselves is that humans are just so good at mimicking and how we've learned things. There's not a ton of like genius as much as we think. There's just a lot of like, we learn stuff and we're really good at teaching stuff, and we're really good at, we can, pass things off. Like, so I do think that we definitely pick things up. I would guess we pick things up along the way that then are always on us, but we didn't have them maybe from the beginning.
Sure.
How do you learn? Are you a person that you said you've been soaking up everything? How has that been impacting your now, professionally, personally, relationships, everything? There's been some, whitewater waves, however you want to describe it, with family, as I've kind of expressed new beliefs or not having old beliefs, but not in a horrible way. Just like, I think part of the reason stories are so powerful is because that's how we most succinctly transfer like ideas to people. So, or metaphors or whatever. Michael Forsberg is so good at this.
So true.
For those of you who are listening, we interviewed Michael Forsberg. I mean, I think episode 8 or 11 or something. Go check out his episode. It's really dope.
Oh, it's really encouraging how he talks about generosity or kindness. I can't remember which language he used. It was so inspiring. And listening, that episode is so good, y'all. Turn this, hit pause on this, go back, start Michael's. But I feel like growth is like an egg coming out of a shell, and it's like or like birth, human birth. It's probably a better example. That's like a traumatic event. It is uncomfortable to leave a place of knowing and comfort and come through. And so how the learning new things or like kind of shifting ideas or being really open to like, oh, you believe we have tons of past lives. Okay. I will listen to that. Like you believe that like there's a bunch of Hindu gods. Okay. Like tell me more about that. It's a little bit like, it's good because I'm open and I really do listen. And I'm really receptive. And it's a little bit uncomfortable because I don't have anything I'm not holding on to like specific handles that I know are like fixed to this one spot. And like, I can always go back to this and like, I got this thing that I know is always like this. So, but I love learning. And so it's been exciting overall, I would say. Like, you know how sometimes anxiety and excitement can feel similar? It feels more exciting than the other thing,
What about it is exciting to you? Like what specifically? Are there things, or is it more so the general kind of feeling of expansion, newness? What about it is exciting to you?
Yeah, I think it's just like, it's like, feels like consciousness. Like you're like learning more, you're like soaking in more. It's like, it doesn't come without maybe a small cost. I think it's easy to romanticize growth and learning, and it's tough sometimes. I'm not going to like lie to you, but to me, it's exciting. It feels like, oh, this is what life has always been doing. And I'm doing what the template of life is, like learning, expanding, risking, growing, living. sometimes it's messy. Sometimes I knock stuff over, but
Yes.
yeah. And I've created a little bit more margin in my life during the pandemic to just read more.
Cool.
Rebecca, people in my life have always read a lot more than I have. I still don't have the same quantity. Like I don't read a book a week. Some of my friends read a book a week. I'm not quite there, but I do try to take in information, listen to conversations like this podcast, and I'm just more like curated with what I ingest, because what I do take in has a somewhat big impact on me, or I process it a lot, or I talk about it a lot. Like, so when I read a book, like it's bad if I read a bad book, because I'm going to talk about it. So if it's like a shitty book, like, sorry, everybody, you know, because I'm going to have to talk about it. But
I have a question for you. When I think of change and growth, and something that pops to my head when you were talking about, like, this is the format of life and we're learning and we're growing and we're tripping, whatever. How do you, I'm asking this, let me preface with saying, in my own growth, there have been some, like, there's a cost to growth, like you were talking about sometimes. And I think at one point, I think you said that, but a cost to growth in my mind could mean letting go of something that you knew, or letting someone go, letting an environment, letting a practice, a routine, which can be really kind of scary sometimes, because it's like, whoa, like that might have been a foundational part of who I was, right? So speaking of the word foundation, how do you stay grounded in the transformational growth that you've had? Because I feel like sometimes, like, I find myself as a person who, like you, I like to learn, I like to experience different things. There's this core sense of, like, for me, safety in grounding myself in, I guess, what I know or what I believe in the moment, or something that is true to me, or known. What does grounding look like for you? And how do you get overwhelmed, like in the midst of newness, or overwhelmed with, like, soaking everything in? Because sometimes it can be overwhelming. So how do you stay grounded in that?
One thing I do that I learned is, like, smile. I am not I normally do not smile. Like in high school, college, just take myself so seriously. And I'm just saying that one because I started to do it, because I thought about it when you were saying it, and then I started to smile. But I do think this is something, if, like, the theory of we have our identity from the set, I do think that this one looks different for everyone.
Yeah.
For me, it's a lot of the basics, which is nature, being, like, in the natural environment of the earth, the world, which just means, like, daily, you know, try to get outside. So like I said, these are basic. I think talking with other humans and, like, trying to, if not normalize, at least be able to express parts of what you're shining light on, so that, like, everything you're learning isn't in this room that no one ever goes to or has access to. So I think sharing the journey, and I think that can be really hard if you don't, like, I have Rebecca, you guys have each other. I have a soulmate who's, like, down for the journey, down for the growth, down for the expression. So nature, kind of sharing with other humans, and journaling is, like, should not be underrated if you don't have that person, or someone that you pay to be able to just be completely open and talk without them being a friend or a family member, or maybe having mixed motives. So a therapist or a coach or whatever that looks like, but just someone that whose job is your benefit, is really helpful. And then I think, like, for me, because of how I'm wired, I am so effing serious sometimes. And so the smiling helps, but then it's just, like, releasing having to put the puzzle together. Like, and that's hard, because I think macro level, and I want everything to work, and I want us to figure this out politically and socially. And I want us to be somewhere where we're not. And so part of it's just, like, accepting, the beauty and chaos that exists with life. Which I think, links to spirituality. I think in the past, spirituality was something I kind of shied away from as I deconstructed a specific belief system. But now I think spirituality really helps as well. I don't have a specific spirituality, but I have a lot of beliefs that are not like science based. So
same.
Cool.
Thank you for answering that. And for those of you who are listening, there's like a beautiful light on Orion's face right now that's coming in from the sunset. So it's really pretty from the skylight. Isaac?
I'm curious about and I'm paraphrasing here. Tell me if I'm getting it wrong at any point. The urge or the compulsion to see it all fit, and I'm asking from what I think is a kindred place. I feel less of that now for any number of reasons, but I know well my version of a feeling where like I see how it could be better and I just want it to be, and I'm tired of seeing like discord and hurt and all of this. So I want to know from you, and maybe this is a simplistic question, like maybe the answer is just like, I'm not a shitty human, but like why like why do you care?
I don't know. One of my mantras that I don't think is specific to me lately is like, your heart is good. So if you ever come to my house, that's my Wi-Fi password.
I love it.
And the most true thing I recently read, Isaac, is this book called Humankind, A Hopeful History. And it's kind of honest about some of the ways for sure that we are group animals and kind of not great to each other sometimes, but there is so much media and stories around kind of the Lord of the Flies version of humans, which is when left on an island, we will kill each other. And almost everyone, even people listening to this, even people in the empowerment space, maybe not everyone, but we're just so quick to be like, oh yeah, humans will always take advantage of humans. And the book really dissects it in a way that's like, actually humans are almost always good to each other face to face. Humans almost never harm other humans. You really have to like indoctrinate that into them. And when it does happen, that it does happen, but a lot of it potentially has to do more with like the modern world way of existing, and like how war was actually really rare at the levels that it is now. So there's like points in there where you could argue with me and probably break apart part of that argument. But my answer is that I think everyone kind of has this thing, and everyone kind of has what I have, which is I want people to get along, and I want people to connect without harming one another. As much as I would love to tell you that that's unique to me, I think that's just a thing about humans, the way that we've arrived to where we are. We're so social. We're so good at connecting. Everyone should read the book. I will just say.
I really want to read it. As an optimist, I'm like, give me all the facts. Let me back up my optimism with facts.
Well, I read Sapiens first, which is like the darkest history of Homo sapiens, which talks about like how we made every single large mammal go extinct as soon as we got to Australia. It's like the fastest extinction rate of any animal to other animals. So I think I bounced off this like really dark, not dark, but like just perception of humans. And then like all things, there's nuance. I think both can kind of belong. And so there's just so much storytelling where we fulfill the prophecy that we make by telling the story a certain way. And so I'm trying to weave in whenever I have a platform or a space, just sort of like, I actually think you're good. I actually think humans are good. Like, and obviously I'm going to get torn down in certain contexts when you watch certain things that are real, that happen, and the harm that humans create for other humans. Like,
I understand.
But yeah.
But we forget to in the next sentence or breath mention the things that are actually good that are happening.
Yeah.
And I feel like the society and news and everything normalizes bad versus normalizing actually what's around us every day. How many people in our neighborhood don't come in and try to like, bang on our door with a bat, like, or like try to deceive us? You know what I mean? I feel like we're just kind of people who want to do life with our family and friends and just be healthy. I don't know, or just get by,
Focusing on the tiniest, most possibly insequential part of what you just said, you used the word bouncing to describe, like, maybe I was bouncing off of the darkness of Sapiens into something different. Do you do a lot of that, like bouncing off of a thing that felt a certain way into a different direction? Or like, tell me about you and how you move through collecting stimuli, let's put it that way.
I have that pattern for sure. With people and relationship, I've had that pattern where I tried one thing, it didn't work out, and then I completely tried the other thing. In a way, I think that is kind of inevitable with behavior, where we are always kind of like, I think so. I was raised with a very concrete belief system, a really specific way of seeing the world, and so I've kind of responded pendulum to that, kind of dancing or outside the circle or expanding it. And so I do think, yes, maybe that's unique to me. I'm like always just responding, I'm not like super intentional where I'm like, I'm going to read. Well, technically I usually just read a bunch of nonfiction, and then I'm like, I have to read a freaking fiction. Like I have to I have to just do this. But I've always I really appreciate nuance, and so I think that's what I get by the contrast is like, I love bison, and there's bison that leave Yellowstone and they go into ranchers' land north of Yellowstone, and they really harm the crops and stuff, and so they're culled. Like the farmers are allowed to like kill them, And I've always thought about making a documentary like fully from both perspectives, like the environmentalists that are like, think this is the worst thing that has ever happened, and finding real, true fragments. And then the other side, like fully telling the other side story with like the impact that it has and the impact on family. And the problem that I have with that is I'm not trying to create apathy. And so I think that project might create apathy where it's like, see, it doesn't it doesn't matter what you choose.
What would you be trying to create? Like what's the motivation there?
Just showing nuance and showing that there's multiple true stories that are true for individual experiences that are different.
Yes.
And so it's like both belong,
I've literally been thinking about that with the state of very loud everything and like saying like, no, this is it. I'm like, wow, like we forgot the nuance of humanity and everyone's experience and everyone's like history and trauma and everything. Everything is just so nuanced that like, the rhetorical question or whatever is just like, how do you hold all that? And then what do you do with it? And I think quieting ourselves or just like, I don't know, this is why I like exploring the conversations that we do on Empowered Human Academy, because you see multiple ways of doing similar things sometimes. And it's like, wow, there's not just one way to do it, or it's not one way to be. So I'm curious, how do you hold, you're a filmmaker, you see a lot of different people's perspectives. How do you hold your truth next to all these different nuanced truths?
And do you do that?
And do you do that?
Yeah, I've struggled with that. I think I've struggled with, I'm really good at adapting, maybe that's kind of answering your last question, Isaac. I'm really good at adapting.
Mm-hmm.
I'm not good at directing. And I'll just be honest about that.
Yeah.
I'm not good at saying, I want to create this exact thing. I'm good at like, okay, you gave me these 3 things. I can totally make something out of this.
Yeah.
Versus like, I'm going to go get the exact things I need to make the thing that I want. And and I think for your question, Abe, it's like, how do I hold my truth next to others? I think it's a balance, because sometimes you have to ignore things and put your head down and move forward.
Yeah.
Whereas my inclination is like, understand everything, let everybody talk, think through all the options. So I think as I just create more, I think I'll start to trust more. Like, oh, I know that I'm going to get negative criticism for this, but I actually believe that what I'm doing needs to be here, and so I'm just going to lean into it, and then hopefully I won't go into like a spiral, because I was firm enough in what I believe to keep doing what I was doing, you know.
Yeah.
But I'll be honest, so I haven't had that. That's probably why I don't have this, or it's one reason why I don't have, you know, this huge career or this huge public persona, because I haven't had this like, I know what I'm doing without any doubts. And I think that will come in higher waves for certain projects or certain times in my life.
That's beautiful.
I personally resonate pretty hard with that, and I think the only reason why I have such direction now is that I've settled on a kind of direction that's sufficiently abstract that it feels like I can hold on to it, which is an interesting way to say it. Yeah. And now that I'm reflecting on my words, like it's abstract enough that it's abstract enough that it's firm enough for me to hold. Like I feel like material specifics and like specific projects are almost like too specific to matter to me, and so I've had to, I don't know, like Lightword as a company, like I feel so strongly about it. I know what it is only because it's so fucking abstract, and I don't know how to tell anyone what it is, but I know what it is, and it's what feels like it feels firm enough to me in a way that smaller air quotes, smaller, more specific, more touchable things are not as real and tangible to me, which is interesting. This conversation is going in interesting places. Normally there's not quite this much dialogue, and normally the person on the other end doesn't ask questions, and I'm enjoying this very much.
I love it. It's like we're hanging out, and our friends and our listeners get to listen in. But here's also a thing that I find interesting, is that it's that balance, that swing, that pendulum that you were talking about, because like, you know, in some instances you're like, I don't have enough like concrete anything to like be grounded in what I'm or have confidence in saying like, this is the way. But sometimes, like you said, depending on the project, whatever situation, you're like, no, this is the truth. And I think that can be a really beautiful dance. And I'm like the opposite. I
actually the opposite.
I stick something and I'm like, this is it. And then I'm open for it to change. But I can't start from abstract. I need to start from concrete. Like, this is what I'm feeling. This is what it is. And then it expands, versus like going from big to small. I go from small to big a lot. I don't know. Does that make sense?
I'm purposefully not giving you a chance to sneak in a word edgewise, because I want to channel whatever you say into this next question. And it comes from like this stirring that I'm feeling and what you're saying. You said you feel like what you're doing needs to be here. And I have a version of that sense, if we're talking about the same thing. That's what I'm carving into here. Like, there are things that I'll do because I sense that the space wants it to exist. I want to know more about what your version of this is. Like, when you say what I'm doing needs to be here, what do you mean? What does that feel like?
When did I say that? What I'm doing needs to be here?
You were talking about holding on to your perspective with others, and you were talking about what you do as a filmmaker and not having like not directing so much as responding. Maybe I'm paraphrasing also here, but I got the sense that at least the way that I heard it, I thought that maybe you were talking about maybe specific projects, like a sense that your reaction to the space is that, oh, there's a not a hole here, but like the space is asking for this to exist, and so I need to do it. Does that feel like a thing?
Yeah, I think there is not like one big specific thing right now. I think
Yeah.
I don't want to keep the conversation abstract with ideas. It's great to talk about like
Oh, I don't
tangible
mind.
things. But one space that I feel very drawn to, and it's kind of an offshoot of the last film Rebecca and I made, which is called Bury Me at Taylor Hollow, which is a 30-minute short documentary about a natural conservation burial ground, which means it's a place that's just like this beautiful forest preserve where that's a cemetery where people are buried and they're not embalmed. And so there's like more environmental friendly practices with the actual burial. It's cheaper. And then you're conserving a bunch of acres that can never be developed. And the combination of making that film and then some of my experiences with loss earlier in my imprint, and then going to Burning Man, and they have this very beautiful ritual called the Temple that was started because somebody died on the way out to the festival, and then they created this big like memorial thing. And Saturday at Burning Man is like a crazy party. You burn the man, and then Sunday you burn this huge temple with so many people's grief and pain in it, and everyone's just quiet. And I feel like the space that I kind of feel a little bit called to right now is to create space for people to process their grief and pain. And part of that is because of what I've learned at Onsite, where I work. I work at Onsite workshops. And one of the clinicians has taught me that like grief is what your body is doing to heal itself, similar to if you get a cut and your body starts to do all this stuff to heal the cut, like your body is doing stuff to heal your body.
Yeah.
Grief is helping the pain pass through your body and not get lodged. There's always going to be pain, but it can transform if you grieve correctly. And so much of our culture interrupts grief because we are uncomfortable with grief. And so the most tangible idea is a podcast, which will be conversations with friends that are going through things like their parents dying, or they are dying, or they had this experience, or XYZ, just creating a little bit more space to have conversations around that. And that might be where some of that healing stuff that I talked about from the beginning pulls in. But and I think that I do feel like, because Abe, you and I have talked about this, where death can be more activating. And for me, it's not, I guess, or it probably was this year, but I can hold that space for people, I guess. And I can be in that space and potentially even get energized from it if it goes well, or if I feel like it was helpful, And I think that I know that that's not true for everyone. And so I feel like I can kind of lean into that. And there could be more films in that vein, or just, I've thought about doing micro things in the neighborhood about people that have lost people during COVID, and creating some type of way for us to safely come together and actually like honor some of these people who were buried without any presence of people. No, there's maybe 8 people that could be there, or whatever it is, just to, like I said, it's not to fixate, it's to help ourselves kind of pass through. David White has this quote, and I can't like find the exact quote online, but Rebecca listened to these poets webinars during COVID, and he said something that I wrote down that was, there's no sincere path in life without heartbreak. And what he meant by that was just like, if you love things, then they're impermanent. And if you truly love them, there will have to be a release of that thing. You're either going to leave it or it's going to leave you. And so, it's very human, I think, to lose things. And so yeah, I feel a small calling to help with, or I feel energy around helping people grieve.
So you mentioned earlier, like, you're not a counselor, but what's the difference between, like, in your mind, like holding the space and like not counseling? Does that make sense? Like, because would one, you know
Yeah.
what I'm saying? Like, what does one go through when they're in that space, and how do you? What's the difference in your mind?
Yeah, I mean, I think for the conversations, I will kind of get some insight from some of my therapist friends. I think for ritual, um, I don't feel as much like I would be uh, crossing some boundary or whatever. Ritual is just like it helps people form strong memories, and memories
Sure.
is are what we remember of life, and it slows time down. We're in a moment. We think back on it like, and so I think the like ritual part, creating rituals, to me, I guess spiritual people have held that role in history.
Yeah.
Like um, obviously, like 150 years ago, there was maybe no such thing as like a quote unquote therapist. Like we have like the history of like everything of the APA, I think it's called, is super racist and excluded non-white people. It was used to like further enslave people at its origin, and so
and excluded and said like homosexuality is a mental illness.
exactly
Up until like the 70s and stuff. Yeah, totally.
So I am a fan of good therapists. Just because someone has a certification doesn't mean they're like a good therapist.
Sure.
I'm saying a lot of things. Oh, sorry if you catch fire for this.
That's okay.
I really believe in qualified therapy. I don't think you should just go to anybody. But I essentially, this is maybe one of those moments of trusting myself where it's like, oh, I think I would be having a net positive. And so I'm not even thinking through, am I a quasi therapist in situation? I don't care. Like, call me what you will. This is worth doing,
Yeah.
And I think, like I don't know the statistic of adult people that go to therapy, but a ton of us don't. And when we were pre-COVID and had all these social interactions and being able to express things, it was a lot better. And in isolation, I feel like hopefully people have realized the need to like talk to people honestly with the reality of their life, because so much of our social interactions can become keeping face, and so if you're in an unhealthy place and you're always having to keep face and pretend, like that creates this dissonance, and then it can be more isolating. And so
absolutely.
I don't think it would be I don't want to be a therapist. I don't want to go to school and become a therapist. I trust that enough to be like, oh, I could play a role in helping people,
Yeah,
absolutely.
Is this in any way related to you recently be able to self-describe as an artist?
No.
Cool. Easy. On to the next question.
Which is
well, I was going to follow up on that because I suspected it might be, but it's cool that it's not in any way. I guess
you can transform the question.
Here's I do want to transform the question. Okay, so for
I could answer a version of that, I guess, but
well, here as long as we're here, let me complete the reforming that I've got in motion here. What I'm curious about is, like, in your exploration and the moving from one thing to the next, and in the dawning awareness of some things like healer and maybe recently like the artist label or identity or however you relate to that, is the arrival, maybe we can put it that way, is the arrival of an identity term, like how is that or isn't that important to you Like, is it significant that you feel the word healer now? Is it significant that you can claim artist?
Or is it just you thought about it for this podcast? You know what I mean? Do you think about it actively?
Yeah. This will kind of answer that. And I'm realizing your last question, which is becoming an artist, play into that. So I think that, like how we talked earlier in the podcast about how, like, I digest information that is like data based and information based and a constructed argument, like if I'm going to believe new things about hunter gatherers or about like 2016 politics, I'm going to need like to be won over by logic.
Sure.
Humans are very not logic based in our actual behavior. We like think we're super smart, but we're not. Like we just do what we feel and what we want to do. But
which is beautiful.
That's a belief system I have that's the way I view humans. But I think before I had the label of artist, which I've definitely, to answer your side of it, Abe, I have felt that was not like a preparation for this podcast. It's been like probably 6 months ago is the first time I said that, like, I don't know if you look at the digital artifacts in my life, if I have anywhere that I'm an artist. I probably have filmmakers certain places, but it does feel important because, like, if I was an educator or historian, I feel the weight to put the puzzle together and then hand you the puzzle through logic. Whereas I think as an artist, I feel like if I'm being honest and authentic, what I create will in some way answer the puzzle, even though I'm not handing you a constructed argument, if that makes sense. Like when you see a sculpture that hits you for whatever reason, and you're just like, it aligns with what you're learning in life and where you're leaning and what your next stage of evolution is, I feel like I can interact with other people in that way as an artist, where maybe when I'm 50, I will be like, hey, here's how life works. Here's how we can save humanity. Here's the game plan. I don't, it's like maybe too much pressure, or like I'm not smart enough. And I don't mean that in a self-condescending way. I just am being honest. Like, and so I feel like the most honest thing I can do maybe is be an artist and express all of it, siphoning through me and out my hands and brain and fingers, and into things that you interact with, into a sculpture in the park, into a mural that you walk by, into a film that you see, into a painting that's on your friend's wall, and then I'm not giving people a full puzzle, but I'm giving them maybe a piece that they're missing.
Yes. I think, like, when I think of Orion and just kind of like this conversation, it's not in a box. And I think it's like, really, you kind of made this kind of motion just kind of very flowy and very just like out your hands, out your mouth, out. Like, I mean, I feel when I'm around you, and I want to say this right now versus at the end, but when I'm like, what I get from you is inspiration to not be in a box. And that's maybe connected to the space that you like to create, but it's just this space of you being yourself, and you dancing and you just vibing invites me and others into seeing that that's possible as well. And that's why I love being around you. We are going to wrap up with 2 questions. The first question is, what does an empowered Orion look like and feel like?
Open, curious, confident. That's the one I need to tell myself right now. Confident and willing to take risks. It's been a big one that I've avoided probably the last decade of my life. Yeah.
Cool. And what do you know for sure?
That is a great question. I actually did not remember the last 2 questions at the end, even though I've listened to like 5 episodes. I don't know. I don't know what I know for sure.
Huh. That's a first, I think. We've heard nothing.
Which is different than I don't know.
Yeah. That's
beautiful.
I was going to say love, but I don't. I still am kind of torn about the universe's creation and if there was chaos mixed in at the beginning. So I don't know. I really don't know.
All right.
Love that.
I appreciate so deeply the like conscious and explicit acknowledgement of I'm for those listening, I'm waving my hands around in the air, like the everything that doesn't come with like terms and a grid and all of that. So thank you for holding that space here and generally.
Well, and what I love about this conversation, just at the end of it, is just that sometimes you don't need takeaways, or there probably are a lot of takeaways that are brilliant, and your brilliant friend, well, our RP. Friend RP and your partner, wife, soulmate is going to derive from this because she's amazing. But I think what I really love about this conversation is that like this is also a very valid, eye-opening, inquisitive conversation that is important to have, because I think sometimes it's like, no, what are the key takeaways? What are some like concrete things? And sometimes getting out of the concrete is actually really beautiful and powerful as well, because it's like, oh, cool. Now I can like think about all the things, and that's just as impactful and powerful as let me go, write in my journal kind of thing, which is also important. But I like the level of this conversation today.
I guess I would say if you're listening to this, I know you have a heart, like you're alive. And that is one of the most unique things that could ever happen. And that you talked about dancing, and I think you were just talking like metaphorically, but that's why I love to dance. Too. The heartbeat, it's just like an expression of, I mean, I've gotten to the point now where I usually can stave off embarrassment, where it's just like, I am expressing my heart, like this is, I am alive. Like my heart is literally like I am alive right now.
I love that. Thank you so much, Orion, for your heart and your movement through life. And thank you for doing our videos for our wedding and anniversary and being a creative partner and everything and a friend. And we're really lucky to know you.
I appreciate you. Thank you, Orion.
Likewise. Bye. Love you guys.
Love you. Bye.
This podcast is the work of Lightward, our company, named for that toward the light direction which informs every single thing that we do, including money, which means, like everything else, the way we earn revenue is not based on industry norms. It's based on what feels deeply right and aligned by passing through the door that feels like it has more behind it, not less. And the way we keep this podcast going is all Lightward. It's pay what feels good. It's an exchange of value between you and us. We're keeping conventional podcast advertising totally out of this. And here's how Pay What Feels Good works. We give you this episode because it feels good to do so. And you consider, honestly, what number of dollars this episode is genuinely worth to you. I do not care if that's $3, $1,000, or literally $0 and a heart emoji, as long as that trade genuinely makes your day better. And the energy there is the entire point. That is what we're building our business on. No advertisers, no selling your attention, just you and us, trading value in a way that builds us both up. So whatever the number, when you're done listening, head to empoweredhumanacademy.com and hit the Pay What Feels Good button. We use this policy across all of our company's work, and I'm really excited to bring it here to the world of podcasts. This is us voting for the world we want to see. Thank you for being here.